Scott, and just want to get some time to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother.
Absolutely. So what got you into politics, government? What was that motivation?
That's real simple, man. It's an easy question.
Yeah.
Growing up in Baltimore in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and growing up in the neighborhood which I grew up in is actually what really pushed me to service. So I grew up in Park Heights, a neighborhood that essentially at the corner of Cold Spring and Pimlico, Cold Spring and Paul Mullen Road, a neighborhood that was essentially forgotten unless it was Preakness time.
Yeah.
And when you grow up like that and you go to schools with no heat and air, right? Something that a lot of people haven't experienced. When you see people get shot, when you see and lose friends, when your friends' parents are severely addicted to drugs or in prison, and you just see all of that, and then you ask the questions growing up, like I would ask my parents and my family members, community members, like why that is, and who was responsible. You make a decision. Whether you're going to accept that that's the way life is, or you're going to do something to change it. And I made a decision early on to change it.
What was your start in politics? What was your first start?
So my first start in politics, look, the easy answer is that student government was my first start in politics, right? So being on the school improvement team at Mervo, doing president of the Black Student Union at St. Mary's College, working on the SGA there, like that's where my start essentially started. But in politics itself in Baltimore, I started lightning in a bottle, man. When then Mayor O'Malley became governor, Council President Dixon became Mayor Dixon, my council rep became council president. I actually applied for the vacancy. This is when I was still living in the 6th district. Didn't get it, but they said, asked me to come on as staff and working in the council president's office, and that's how I got my start. Worked there, then in the mayor's office, worked at Rec and Parks, and decided to run on my own.
What are some of the biggest issues that you've been focused on in your tenure?
Really, for me, it's been three things, right? It's been public safety, youth, accountability, and transparency. That's what the big things for me. And you know, I've been the person. We now everyone, especially during election season, is like, oh, we got to deal with crime. We got to deal with crime, right? And since the unrest, we have had all these issues with crime. Well, if people just remind themselves, I was talking about it before the unrest, right? Leading 300-man march, one demanding a crime plan. I've been leading the fight to have the police department become a local agency. It's actually a state agency, right? So you get people, you know, asking, like, why isn't the council making the police do this or that? Like, they don't have the authority to do that. Only the mayor does. Then also been very proud to pass the open data law for Baltimore City, right? Pass the equity assessment program that's now going to force, beginning with this upcoming budget, the city to operate through a lens of racial equity. Proud of a lot of that work, but still unsatisfied and have a lot more to do, which is why I'm trying to raise my level.
So what, as a mayor, what would you do differently? What type of power, what type of access would you be able to tap into differently than you would now?
I think that this is the key. Where Baltimore is right now, this is the most critical election in a generation, if not forever, for Baltimore. It's not just about who the next mayor will be. It's what kind of mayor they will be, what they will stand for. Will they be a mayor that's connected to the status quo of city government and how it's operated for the last 40-something years, right? Meaning thinking they can just pluck in better people into the existing system and everything will be all right, or turning back to things that we used to do 10 and 12 years ago? Or will they understand that, one, if you put great people in a broken structure, they're going to fail. And that's where I come in, because I'm talking about building a new city government structure, a new way forward to operate city government through equity, through understanding best practices, professionalizing city government, and tackling the issues that we have in a 21st century way. For example, the city is a $3 billion business. You will not find a $3 billion business with a chief executive and a chief administrator of the same person, right? But that's how the city operates. In fact, all of the current surrounding counties around us, the cities that we're in between, DC and Philadelphia, the mayor appoints a city administrator or some kind of professional person to run the day-to-day operations. We're going to bring that to Baltimore.
Okay. So what are some of the critiques that you have of the current system, specifically that you say, okay, once I'm elected, if I'm elected, these are the main 1, 2, 3 things that I want to change off the bat?
Well, first things first. First thing that's missing right now is the accountability, right? Good, bad, or indifferent, when things come to play in Baltimore and when things are happening on the streets of Baltimore, the mayor's responsible, right? You hold the person who has the power responsible. And what's lacking right now is that owning it, right? Saying that I'm responsible for crime. I'm responsible for our schools, even though they're not technically a city agency.
Yeah.
That's number one. But then when you talk about that structure, right, that understanding that the city charter has been the same way for a long time. Most of it, actually, ironically, was created, this power dynamic was created in the early 1900s.
Wow.
During some fights between the Republican Party when they controlled the city. You can't operate a city in 2020 the same way you did in 1974, let alone in 1908. So the thing that I talked about with you a second ago, having that official professional city administrator, having that be in law, and I'm not going to wait. We're going to put that on the ballot for the citizens to do that now. Like the other cities around the country that do that, a lot of folks will say like, oh, you're cutting in the mayor's power, and oh, the mayor can just appoint that person. One of the mistakes that we've had our elected officials do in Baltimore, especially our mayors, they've only governed from 4-year term to 4-year term. You have to govern for people that are not going to be able to vote for you. You have to govern down the line, building in those structures. Right? I'm also running for mayor and talking about reducing the power of the office of the mayor via the board of estimates. Right now, we know the board of estimates is controlled by the mayor. I and every taxpayer that I speak to has never thought that the city solicitor or the Department of Public Works director should determine how $500 million of taxpayer dollars is spent. So we're going to change that as well.
Yeah, and so what are some of the ways you look to engage the voter base? Because as we know, Baltimore doesn't have the best voter turnout. What are some of the ways that you look to engage maybe people my age? I'm 26 years old, people younger than me. There seems to be this disconnect between people my age and younger with the government. People are just kind of in a daze, sort of, and believe that Baltimore's never going to change. We've heard everything before. We've had X amount of mayors. Everybody's promised this. Everybody's promised that. And we have scandal and corruption and lack of transparency. What are some of the ways that you want to increase the connection between the mayor's office or city government and the people?
Well, listen, what we'll be doing is expanding what I've done, right? I've been actually often criticized from a lot of the folks that I represent and some of my counterparts and even some of the senior community for you spend too much time talking to the young people. And I said, well, I'm going to do for them what nobody ever did for me, right? I'm going to go and talk to them, let them know that they're part of this too, that I represent their interests too. And lo and behold, we get great ideas out of young people, right? I'm going to be very honest with you. Now they didn't have to sell me, but if the young people of Baltimore didn't turn out in Baltimore City Hall and say we don't want any more styrofoam or we don't want any plastic bags, they would still be there. The young people push that over the hill, and we have to engage them and meet them where they are, right? So I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to go out to the people. We're going to use 21st century technology. Right now, when they do these surveys, they only do phone, right? But we're going to be texting to zip codes, going out and seeing where people are, engaging with people, understanding, continuing to do the traditional things. Like this summer, I had 8 town halls and then 1 online. Having a digital town hall, you're a lot more likely to get young people. We're going to engage every demographic across the city in the way that's most comfortable for them.
What are the ways that you look to increase equity within the city neighborhoods?
Yeah, so Baltimore is historically one of the most inequitable cities in the country. It's actually the birth of housing redlining through legislation. We have a street named after the guy who did it, Mayor Preston, which I want to change one day. But that's what caused me to do the equity assessment program, because my grandmother would say, when you know better, you do better, right? The generation before us thought that, hey, we've had a black mayor, a female mayor. There's been women running agencies. There have been gay people running agencies. So of course now we've arrived. But we know that to not be true in our generation because of just of research and data, that just because I have a black mayor or a black police chief or a black school CEO or a woman running DPW, if the policies for that agency were written 40, 50 years ago, guess what those policies don't do? They don't think that women, that black people, that poor people have equal rights. So what's going to happen now through this law is every single thing that the agencies do, their capital budget, which is where the most egregious thing is happening, and no investment into East and West Baltimore, only in the rich neighborhoods. Everything has to be presented through a lens of equity. All their policies and practices have to be assessed, and how they're going to correct the ones that are wrong, their way that they interact with the public, how to do their hiring, how to do their firing. And we will, when I'm in the mayor's office, govern through a lens of equity, making sure that we are intentionally building up the places that have been forgotten, not just focusing on the same old neighborhoods.
Yeah. And how do you look to present this information to the general public in a transparent way? Because there seems to be, in general, things happen in city government.
Right.
Some things people are aware of, some things people aren't aware of. And within engaging the voter base, engaging the general Baltimore citizen population, how do you look to give that information over to the people so that people can say, okay, this is great. Okay, I wonder if we can do this or this, that, and the third. How do you look to do that?
Same way, man. We have to be, it's 21st century. Be very transparent, right? Make sure that we're continuing to expand how we use open data and transparency, putting those things out, putting the budgets out, making sure that we're having these budget pop-ups in a larger form, doing them in focus groups. Again, sending these alerts out saying, hey, look, you live in this zip code, this capital project is coming. Click here to get more information. Click here to give your impact. And then, of course, doing the stuff that we have to do. Town halls, all of the original phone, all of that kind of stuff. You have to, in the 21st century, you have to communicate with people in so many different ways. And I think that the city is lagging in the way that we're doing it and being very targeted, right? Even down for how you're doing. If I'm doing a capital project in 21215, then I'm going to go on Facebook and I'm going to make sure that we're boosting it in that zip code so that people that live there will see it.
And one of the last things I want to talk about is what about the homelessness problem? Homelessness problem is becoming unbelievable. I live over in Mount Vernon, right across from the prison, right across from a lot of the House of Roof, Daily Bread, etc. And there is an unbelievable, to me, a bubble almost of homelessness and people not having a place to stay. How do you look to tackle that? Is that something that you look to partner with other organizations, nonprofits, etc.? What's your vision for that?
You have to. And when you talk about homelessness in Baltimore, there's a couple things that you cannot talk about homelessness and not talk about, right? You cannot talk about housing affordability. You cannot talk about mental health. And you definitely cannot talk about addiction, right? All of these things tie in together. And what we have to do is first and foremost understand that they're interconnected, right? And building those partnerships of how we're going to deal with them. So, for example, I've already introduced into the council trying to change the way Baltimore deals with addiction, right? And pushing us to be through a harm reduction approach. We're even talking about overdose prevention sites, ways to save people's lives. But when you understand that a lot of these individuals who are homeless are entering into all these multitudes of systems. Well, you would think by now that someone would say, hey, let's press pause. Bring all of these folks together to see where we can work together and then work through those tough issues, right? Because one person who's homeless might be at this level and ready to get right back into stable housing. The next person might be at this level. And we have to build those support systems to meet people where they are so that we're not just pushing them from one program to the next. We have to do that. And then when you talk about housing affordability here in Baltimore, that's why it's critically important the work that the Housing Affordability Trust Fund is working on and their task force is working on, because we're going to also have to make sure that we're providing opportunities for people to have affordable and stable housing as well.
And so just having a conversation with you, just being honest, there's a lot. There's a lot going on in the city. There's a lot of task force. There's a lot of committees. How does a person who is interested but not able to sift through or siphon through all of that be able to find a feed or a source of saying, here are the important things that's happening in the city? I think a lot of what happens is there's sort of this sensory overload of information. Obviously, we have the violence that catches everybody's eyes. Then you have the homelessness that catches your eyes every day. You got the squeegee boys, you got this. And it's to the point where some people feel that there's so many problems in Baltimore. How do we even tackle this? And so, of course, you have a bunch of committees that diffuse that power amongst themselves, but may have different timelines, different people, different agendas, et cetera. How do you look to coalesce all those groups, or maybe coalesce or create sort of an overarching direction for Baltimore so that everybody has something that they're working towards?
That's a tough work, right? The mayor has to be a convenient. Again, it's the same thing. It's not just sensory overload, right? In some areas, I think you agree that there's service overload. In some areas, there's no service, right? What you have to do is you have to have a leader that wants to actually do that. The tough work of convening people, right? And challenging people, because we have organizations, city agencies, government agencies, nonprofit, community groups, all these folks who have not really been challenged in the greater picture of the city. And this is why I often say that we have to be unafraid to be unelected because we did the right thing and not the popular one. Because coming in and bringing whatever wins, just say we talk about homelessness or youth services, we might have to say, like, look, you're working in this neighborhood, this person is working in this neighborhood, that person is working in this neighborhood. Somebody needs to, you guys are all in Cherry Hill. We need some of y'all to go over to Curtis Bay, or we need somebody to go over in this neighborhood where they have issues but not the services. And that's a tough conversation to have, but it has to be had if we're going to actually truly reach out and touch everybody that we can touch.
So what does the future look like for Baltimore? What are some of the markers? Maybe you have some of the markers or I think milestones. What are some of the milestones that you may look at? You say, okay, if this happens or if this happens, I know that I'm on the right track. I know Baltimore's on the right track. I know that I'm working towards what I want to do in the city.
A couple things I think that we can talk about, right? One, clear is the obvious one. We start to see crime come down because we realize that we're going to handle crime as a public health issue, and we're going to handle it both through a policing lens, removing the violent repeat offenders, getting guns and the flow of guns off the streets of Baltimore, but doing the long-term work, investing in education, investing in re-entry and workforce and youth development, the tough work, right? Seeing that come down. Second, because you're creating that environment that you have a functionally working city government, people are coming back into the city. Population, visitors are coming back. But the one that I think is very critical that we don't think about a lot is school population. How many people are sending their children to Baltimore City public schools and how those young people are faring in our school? Those are the telltale signs. And then also there's, of course, the obvious stuff, right? When you talk about efficiency in city government, you can see that, right? When agencies are now having better audits and agencies are now having better performance, and you can see those efficiencies and effectiveness coming back. Those are the telltale signs, I think, that will start to help people come back.
Okay. So what are some of the incentives for people who are more business-minded, entrepreneurs in the city, to continue to do business in Baltimore and not move elsewhere?
So I think this is a great topic to touch on too, because it's also very important that we think about this through a lens of equity, right? When you think about how the city has done its incentives, it's never been for really, for the most part, for businesses that are already here. And yes, we do have to continue to go after the next big and best business to steal from someone else to bring to Baltimore, like we stole the CIAA from Charlotte, right? We're going to continue to do that work. However, when you look across the country nationally, where does your job growth come from? It comes from small and medium-sized businesses that people have started, and you have to invest in them to help them grow and do that in an equitable way as well, right? I've been pleased to do that as a council person. We're going to take that and expand it out, but also think about it like this. Think about the growing communities in Baltimore, right? A few years ago, we knew that we were just tech hub. We had all these tech companies, right? So what did the city do? We created the emerging technology centers, right? I had the pleasure of having one in my district and saw how that investment that we made into this building that no one wanted sprawled in an entire community. Imagine if we did the same thing for the growing maker businesses, those folks that build things and provide services and clothes and everything at the Made in Baltimore store and all these other places across the city. Imagine if we built hubs for them in East or West Baltimore and what that could mean for those communities. And then this is something that's very simple. But when I talk to business people, right, I just finished being the chair of the National League of Cities, Large Cities Council. When I talk to business owners outside of the city and around the country, and they talk about, well, why they wouldn't move here or how hard it's been to move here, of course, the obvious things come up, crime, etc. But the number one thing I always hear from them is like, but the government is so dysfunctional. I had to call you to get my water bill. If you have a functioning government and understanding the burden that creates on business owners and homeowners, that's what you have to tackle first in order to be able to create the environment that makes them want to come.
Yeah, so I myself am someone that I work remotely some days, and so I end up parking at different coffee shops, etc. And at certain neighborhoods, it's pretty expensive to park. And some people might view that as a poor people's tax in the sense of, I mean, I heard a stat where if you have a car in Baltimore, you're eligible for 80+% of the jobs. If you don't have a car, you're only eligible for like 11% or something like that. So the cost of having a car, not only the cost of having a car, you need a car to get a job, but now if you have a car, it costs not only to have the car, but to park if you work at a Potbelly's or Starbucks or what have you, and you make $8.50 an hour. How does the city look to manage, maybe encourage, incentivize the everyday person to want to travel for work? What are some of the things that you look for there, and also real estate taxes in order for people to want to own property?
Yeah, so a couple things. Let's start with the real estate taxes since you finished with that, right? We know that ultimately the city has to be more competitive with the surrounding jurisdictions around this. But what we also have to do is be very responsible and understand that first, we have some big bills coming, right? So if someone comes out here and says they're gonna fully fund the Kerwin Commission, fully fund the consent decree, and cut city property taxes in half, you should be very wary of that person. But this is what the responsible kind of leader would do. First things first. Again, they have not done something this simple. We have audits. We had 2 of them today at the Board of Estimates, right? Audits, so set that aside for a second. What needs to happen is a forensic assessment of the city's government from top to bottom. Every agency, everything that they do, down to, cars, office space, cell phones, programs that they use in a computer that they don't talk to, every single thing that they have, so that we can see where we are, where we need to be, and recapture those inefficiencies. And then also do the tough work of looking what other cities have done, right? In Nashville and San Francisco, they work with their state partners to be able to create an opportunity for them to lower their taxes without cutting services. That's how we're going to have to do that. But we have to first start looking in the mirror and do our assessment. To your other point, when you talk about people having to own a car to go to work in Baltimore, talking about transit, right? So when you talk about transit and the need for leadership in actual public transit in Baltimore, you're talking about this is what you need for a mayor, in my opinion. First and foremost, right? We know that right now the mayor doesn't have any real say over MTA. What has to happen, in my opinion, is that the mayor of Baltimore, Baltimore County Executive, Howard County, and Arundel County Executive need to coalesce, support the folks in Annapolis who are trying to go to a regional transportational model so that the region can help decide how these things are done. And one person can't just walk in and say, we have $1 billion to build a subway line, I'm not going to do it. But in that time in between, it's critical that the city partners, the same way we do circulators downtown, right? Why can't we do a circulator that takes people from Mondawmin, where most people can get to, right?
A lot of people
right? Can get there, take them from Mondawmin to the job centers, right? To Port Covington when it's built, out to Trade Point, out to these places. That's the creative kind of work that we can do while we're doing the long-term work of getting an actual transportation system.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.